They-
All right, welcome. But Gary, we are going to be in the second half of 2025 before we know it, like in the blink of an eye. This is just absolutely cruising at warp speed this year. I don't know if you guys see it from your lens, but it's just pretty staggering. And one of the things we're going to talk about going at warp speed today is AI. So welcome everybody.
Well, Andrew, we'll be slowing down. You can't see it, but behind me in my studio here, I'm actually building something to slow time down that I'm working on.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Hurry up.
Once I invent it, we'll all have plenty of time.
Yeah, perfect.
That's fantastic. Okay, let me just kind of do a quick sound and visual check. Welcome everybody. Can you guys all hear, see us okay before we get rolling? Yep, good to see. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, Bob Miller is certainly in the house. So let me kick things off. We got a small crew today. There's a lot of people that are traveling that normally we would have on, but let me set the stage here. And today's topic, data governance and LLMs, I put, are guardrails possible? And, so today is one, I mean, we've already been having a spirited talk before we even came on. So, whether you've rolled out, AI tools, and I'm air quoting large language model tools internally, or, advising clients on adoption of this technology, one burning question, and I'll share with you why this should be the burning question is, what are the guardrails, or what kind of guardrails can we use to improve AI security? And specifically, it's going to be around, the data governance side of this. AI adoption, as we know, is accelerating. In fact, it's being pushed in the channel aggressively. I don't know if you Gary, if you saw this, but I logged into Office 365 recently, and the UI completely even changed. Did you guys see that?
Yes.
Where you no longer just, your apps are really relevant and prevalent. It's here's Copilot, right, sitting in front of you. So
right.
we're kind of being, and I'm like, well, where did Outlook go? And so so the last thing I just want to share here, Gary, I'm going to turn it to you to kind of start talking to Bob about this. I just want to share my screen to, and some people commented, like when I said, are guardrails possible? And people are like, oh, yes, they are. And I'm like, well, I'm certainly interested to figure out this whole piece out, because this is the Verizon Data Breach Report. And this, as we know, Verizon certainly looks at many different size companies, but they certainly have a very good purview into enterprise. And even with enterprises that have, governance in terms of how corporate, information and corporate and access to their LLMs is achieved, you can see here that the majority of people are just saying, you know what, screw it. I'm going to get my job done more effectively. And 72% here, Garrett, I don't know if you see this visual, but is this coming through okay to everybody?
Yeah, we see it.
72% are saying, you know what, screw it. I'll just go personal. So anyway, with that kind of backdrop, Gary, I'm going to turn it over to you as we kind of dig in here on this topic. So over to you, my friend.
Yeah. Look, this is one where this is like just a start of a conversation.
Yeah.
Like in the time we have today, we can maybe frame out some things. And usually we like to give some answers here. I think we're just going to ask questions more and talk about the questions more than give the answers, because all of us, that includes our audience, we're all guessing at a lot of things right now, right? But I think we're going to need answers way sooner than we've needed answers to other questions about security and other things, because this is moving, much faster. I feel differently even about the impact, in general on the economy, but also on MSPs. I feel differently today, Andrew, than I felt 60 days ago. Right. And so that's moving fast. So Bob, let's level set a little bit what we mean by AI or LLM governance issues and how MSPs are getting pulled into some of these governance challenges.
Yeah, we were talking, Gary, and we were all talking before about how things are changing from an MSP standpoint, right? And the reason we're being forced to do that is because of the chart that Andrew just got through showing, right? I mean, the amount of adoption and the pent up demand that's out there from an enterprise standpoint is overwhelming, right? I mean, how long, Gary, has the cyber call been, about, hey, how can we get people to buy cybersecurity, right? It's been that way for a long time. You don't have to sell people on the idea of using AI.
No,
That is not something you have to spend time selling people on. They're trying to pull you by the nose and say, "Hey, we got to go," right? And
they
so
don't.
from an
They almost don't have a choice, right?
right,
Like you're
right, right.
either getting ahead or you're falling behind.
Yes, right. And I always called it a herding instinct. That the herd is headed this way. So we better figure out how to play a part. And in the case of MSPs, they're going to get pulled along whether they like it or not. So, when the majority of our MSPs out there are smaller MSPs, the point is how they get drawn into this is because these companies are dependent on them. We're already being dependent on to give them security advice, right? I mean, that's something that's already been established. And they ask us, even if they don't do it, they at least ask us, right? So they depend on those kinds of things. But now we're getting pulled into this. Okay, well, how's AI going to impact my organization? What should I be worried about, right? And you guys are the ones that help keep control of my infrastructure and help me with all those kinds of access controls. And you're the MSP. You know how to do RBOC and what that means and all those kinds of things. Well, now we got this 800-pound gorilla that can basically get to all of our data at light speed. you know how do we control that 800-pound gorilla that's going to be wind up sitting in our network? And you're the MSP, you're the smart people, so why don't you tell us? Which is drawing us in, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
drawing
well,
us into how
I'm
that
sure
works.
the government will update CMMC for this within 15 or 20 years.
Yeah, yeah, when the AIs are
If
running
history
it.
tells us anything.
Hey, Bob, and another point too is even let's just wave a wand. Let's just say you could
Yeah,
put governance around Copilot because majority of us are all in the space Microsoft. Let's just say
yeah,
you could.
yeah, yeah,
What the data is clearly saying is employees are like, look, I want to get my job done more efficiently. I'll just do Chat GPT with Gmail. Real, I
yeah.
mean, isn't that really what the data is saying?
Yeah, no, but I mean, you got to remember it was the same way before cybersecurity was a thing, really, right? We just put access points everywhere, connect everybody up to the Ethernet, and just do shit, right? We would just go. So I mean, it's the same way, except the order of magnitude of what can be done now is so much higher because the technology is so much more advanced. We're just seeing the same behavioral pattern, like, oh, look, I can't wait for all the rules to get into place. I got to go, right? I can't get left behind. So it's a cultural philosophical thing, right? And I spent so much time looking into this because I was building scenarios for the IR game to show them the risks, right? What can happen, if you don't have these things configured correctly and you don't consider these governance issues. And so that really got me deep into, okay, well, what can you do today, right this second? Because like Gary's pointing out, we're having to kind of make this shit up as we go. There's not like a playbook for all this just yet, right? So,
No.
but that's how we're getting pulled into it. No two ways about it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I even see like how I'm talking to our peer members on one side. I'm
Right.
spending now more time telling them to go. Like they have to figure out how to be first, to be more efficient, to understand how to make not just support, but their whole business more efficient before the competition. Then they're going to figure out how to get their customers there. Because either we're going to bring their customers there or someone else who currently doesn't have the same relationship with them that we do is going to come from the outside and do it. But the other side of it is all of these things we're talking about today, Bob, right? Which
100%.
is how do they go fast, figure it out, and then, contemplate a different type of security risk that we don't have guardrails, right? We don't have a framework,
Yeah.
uh, like a literal framework around how to do it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and with cybersecurity, you had programs and you knew how programs worked, and you could see programs and you could reverse engineer them. You could tell what the hell's going on. You had some knowledge of the underpinnings of how this works. When you get into, when you look at an AI model in general, it's just an array of nodes and vectors that make absolutely no sense. When you get into it down at the binary level, there's nothing familiar about it. There's
Yeah, the
literally
people who
nothing
created
familiar
it
about it.
will say they don't know how it works.
Exactly. And if they don't know how it works, we're not going to know how it works. That's just I think this is the fundamental shift that has happened is that we're going from a known quantity, something that we could actually reverse engineer, to an area that we just don't have the ability to understand because of the size, scope, and scale of it. And now we're going to try, instead of being able to understand it at that granular level and control it, we're going to have to figure out how to put fences around it to keep it from running over us. Right. I mean, we're going to be more in defense than offense in a lot of ways.
So what are some of the red flags that maybe, you know, that you can watch for to tell a client if we think they're heading into trouble in this area?
Well, yeah. So let's just stick with the ecosystem that's 80% out there, right? I mean, at least there are, when you have these AI assistants and they're in the system and they're running, there are certain flags that you can kind of keep an eye on, right? Like directory read all or file read all parameters that you can start at least paying attention to and see if there's a behavioral change in the frequency and the density of the request. And logging on multiple levels. This is right now, our trick today is going to be, we're going to have to log and route these logs into, if you don't have a SIM, you're going to need to get a partner who has a SIM. You're going to need something that can evaluate the volumes of data that are going to be coming out of these logs at more like light speed. You're not going to be able to play the old, hey, let's open a ticket and try and figure out what's going on thing. The train will have left the station. So we're going to have to get much more intelligent about which areas of the operating stack are we going to have to watch for the logs for, and which parameters like directory read all, file read all, those kinds of things that we're going to have to pay a lot more attention to, because the volumes go up dramatically depending on what they're doing with these AI assistants. Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Do you feel, and I don't know if this is the, quick band-aid, but because the browser is kind of the lead into these systems, right? I'll get around is browser security and being able to see, what's happening there at really kind of the tip of the spear. Is that going to be a bigger piece for MSPs to be able to have to monitor and maybe limit what browsers, what they can do?
You have to remember, I mean, it's a little bit of a paradigm shift, because how we always talk about perimeter defense, right? At one point, we had perimeter defense from a cybersecurity standpoint. What you're referring to with a browser is perimeter defense against the use of AI, right? You're only going to be able to control that window of gazintas and comatas. You know what I mean? That really is the only slice you're going to have under control at a browser level. So the way to get past browser controls now are a mile long. So I don't know that those could be a layered, let's just put it this way. That's the equivalent of being a layered defense, right? Maybe you could look at controlling, certainly your browser configurations should be tight regardless. Let me put it this way. Outside of AI, your damn browser security should be primary, because it's something you can control. You know what I mean? It's something that we all know a lot about. But once it gets past that, the cat's out of the bag. And when you talk about, in terms of enterprises, API usage and the ability to abuse these AI assistants via APIs, which are not even, they don't go through a browser, right? I mean, they have nothing to do with the browser.
Yep.
Those are issues too.
And to make them powerful, that's what they have to do.
Yeah, to
right?
get the
Like
volume and the
power
speed
comes from.
Right. I call this, so my scenario that I built was an AI cloud compromise scenario, right? But I affectionately call it the AI smash and grab, because instead of them having to go through your network file by file, directory by directory, looking for sensitive shit, they could just ask the AI assistant, hey, scrape up everything on all of my contracts and their account numbers and everything, and bundle it up in this nice little ball, and then write me a little PowerShell script and send it all to this email address, and dump that. If you're ill configured, if you're not configured correctly and you don't have these protections in place, that's just how fast that's going to happen. I mean, it is going to be a drive-by, right? And before you even know they're in there, they're going to be gone. So those are elements that we have not had to deal with before. The ability for people they don't have to download 20 gigs to get 2 gigs or 1 gig of useful information. Now they can get the 1 gig or the 100 megabytes of it that they really want, and be gone before the dust settles, right?
Yeah, Andrew, in thinking about your question about browser security, like I think we're seeing like so many startups, like you and I know a few of them, right? Around it, that tells you. But I think that's only a sliver, right? Like the Bob described, that's only a sliver of one layer when it comes to AI. And the other thing is, it's going to take time. Like I think browser security, because it impacts how the user works, it's all the way back to MFA again. The same kind of education, the same type of evangelization that we had to do because it impacted directly the productivity of a user. And the same thing's going to happen with browser security. So it takes time. You know what I mean, Andrew?
Yeah, we moved the needle from 31% to 37% in 2 years with adoption.
Yeah.
I'm joking around, sarcastic, but that's even that's still a tough hurdle, but which I think is what you're saying, Gare.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm trying to read Keith's question here. Can you see what he means? What does he mean?
You mean about, being a service provider versus business results?
Well, I think if he's saying, what I was reading from it is, look, if you're the difference between a service provider and a valued partner, right, is which end of the conversation you come in on. Do you come in on it when they ask you about it, or do you come in on it when you go in and start explaining what's really happening, what they need to be familiar with, right? Are you taking the lead and you understand it enough that you can be proactive, or are you just being reactionary? That's what I take away from it.
Yeah, look, at the minimum right now, regardless of your operational maturity level or where you are with your understanding of AI or even your security posture, if you're not having if you're not talking to the decision makers at every one of your customers and getting their view of how they see AI, what it means to their business, whether they've thought about the security concerns, where they think, the biggest impact will be, do they feel risk, in terms of how fast, if you're not having that conversation with every one of your customers today, I mean, that's the first thing you can do. And you learn more from those conversations as a starting point as to what to do and how to spend your time and how to communicate with people.
Yeah. But it also doubles down, Gary, with something you've talked about many, many times, is what level of relationship do you have in that organization? Because it's one thing to have that conversation at a mid-management level. It's a totally different conversation to have it at an executive level.
Yeah. So, Bob, Andrew was talking about the Verizon report, like 72% of individuals now are, going in through their Gen AI systems, through their personal, log on stuff. So they're not controlled by the company. So with that, you started to touch on this, but how do we rethink access controls and data loss, prevention, like in a world where we're living in
the
more,
Wild West.
not less shadow IT now because of
it. Yeah. Well, I mean, and what's interesting is it's hard to tell what's shadow and what's not. That's the problem, right? But bottom line, though, I mean, what we're going to have to rely on is the same thing we should have been heavily relying on for cybersecurity in general, right? And that is just, our RBOC, right? Having the right kind of, access control in place, role-based access control, and more so now with AI, you got to really start depending on data labeling policies. You know what I mean? Now, this is where the rubber kind of meets the road, but it is also the biggest hurdle that we have, not from an MSP or organization or provider standpoint, but most enterprises' data is in shit shape. It is, it's mixed, it's, commingled. At the base, they don't usually have really clean databases with certain types of data well defined in certain areas of their, of their ecosystem. But you have to have that. You have to have that if you're going to apply any sort of useful data labeling policies as it relates to that data. And why is that important? Because who needs to see that data depends a great deal on what type of data it is and where it is stored, right? So, there's going to be, I will tell you this, there's going to be a lot of service provider work just trying to straighten out the data layer for a lot of these enterprises, because they're going to have to get their data squared away before you're able to label it and secure it. Now the bad part about it is it doesn't have to be that way for them to use it. They can use it in the shit shape, the shit shape it's in, honestly, right? Because the agents will go root around and they will draw inferences from collecting that all in one place and doing that. But you will never be able to apply a rational sort of governance layer on top of that if that stuff is all commingled and not labeled correctly. So that puts a lot of pressure. it's the organizations are going to keep going and they're not going to want to stop to clean it up, but they're going to need to stop and clean it up in order to mitigate their risk. So to your point, Gary, there's going to be some big, what's going to happen is they're just going to go and some big ass event's going to happen, right? That exposes the universe in some way or another. And then we're all stop and talk about it for a few minutes before somebody changes their mind. So I mean, I can see the cycle. It's the same cycle we go through with cybersecurity, right? We're going to see it.
Yep.
And also, Bob, if you look at like, Microsoft, correct me if I'm wrong, but in order to get things like Purview, you have to, it's an upcharge, right?
Yes. Yes.
And they haven't, historically, it's not easy to do multi-tenancy with Microsoft. So
100%, right. Yeah.
Right. And then, is it, does that, are they in essence trying to push you into an E5? Like, so like if there's a lot of considerations here, just we've struggled as an industry, and like you said, all companies struggle with data inventory.
Yeah.
But
100%.
now it's there's a lot more at stake, for this.
Right.
Ever, it seems.
Yeah, well, there is. Now, I want to make sure that people at least have something to start go looking at so that they can understand what I'm saying. The AI assistant, you could actually put some policies around it about what its scope is. So you can make it, you can put the scope of reader only, or you can put the scope of a scope contributor. These are roles that that control the directory read all access, file read all access. I don't know. I have not done all the command lines to go and make that all happen, but I have seen multiple times across all the Microsoft information. Those are areas where you can actually go apply some policies to keep that AI assistant in your ecosystem from running wild. I want to make sure and put that out there because I want them to have a place to go start looking at kinds of things that they can do. But to your point, data governance is going to rely on data labeling and being able to do that, no question, to be effective. So
yeah.
So Bob, let's switch over. We've been talking left of boom.
Yeah.
Let's move over right of boom. I know that and IR games or something you spend a lot of time on. So thinking about it from this perspective, like what procedures, logs, monitoring, communication trees, like all those things, place before we have an AI breach.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it changes the game. Again, when no pun intended, but it does change the game of incident response when these get involved because of the nature of them. Even the incident response firms are still trying to catch up with how do they go forensically figure out what the hell's going on, when an AI assistant's really heavily engaged in an incident, right? So again, all of these, you need to have playbooks, specific to AI incident response. You're going to need to think in terms of, and again, we talked a little bit about the logging is a critical thing. So let's talk about the types of log, Azure activity logs, right? For the virtual machines and containers, the creation and any of the changes that are going on, watch those at the Azure level, but you need to combine that with the Microsoft Graph level so you can, trace AI and Copilot sort of usage. You need to be watching those kinds of things. And then the Purview logs are content access, right? And data movement and DLP triggers, all of those things combined are the logs that you're going to need to be able to stream and keep track of to be able to help you in terms of working what could be an AI focused incident in this situation. But the playbooks, how you're going to are you going to shut it off, right? If it's a main part of your process workflow, which it's going to be, automation is close to your heart, Gary. This is going to be the thing, right? They're going to use these engines to drive automation and in some case infer what the next step in the workflows are. You need to be able to throw a switch to turn that off at some point if things are happening and you don't know what's going on, right? That's a different type of playbook. And when do you turn it back on if you think everything's okay? Another thing you got to really understand as it relates to that, right? And then you need to have you're going to need in an organization, you're going to need a governance crew. Think of it as an AI change management team, right? So when you're going to monkey with workflows and you're going to be using automation through AI assistance, you really need people to look at that workflow and understand what it's doing before you flip the switch and say, yeah, just go. Everything's cool, right? Because you're going to need to be able to tell, okay, where's the off switch? How are we watching it? Who's got the ball when we need to shut it down? Those are all different things as it relates to workflows that you're using this for. So pre-approved emergency lock procedures, that's something you need to be aware of. All these are escalations on legal and PR. There's a discussion about, okay, what happens if you're an MSP and your AI runs off and does something and, exfiltrates something? How's that treated differently than if one of your actual humans does the same thing?
Yeah.
Big questions we got to answer, right?
Yeah. It's funny just in general when we think about all this, we always talk here about, the advantage that the bad guys have, right? Like we got to be right every time. They only have to be right once. So to take and harness the things we're talking about today, from a black hat standpoint, it's much easier, much more focused. Do one thing, test it, roll it out, speed things up, find new ways, like you said, of it, targeting, pulling
Yeah,
together the information.
right.
But on our side, uh, it just, now extrapolates the number of questions and defenses and layers.
Yeah.
It's, yeah,
It's a challenge. I mean, again, that's why monitoring these things, monitoring these have these things logged. First of all,
yeah,
monitor them because it'll be so hypercritical, right? But you're going to have to make decisions quickly. That's the thing, because an hour or two of somebody running amok in this situation, if you're not configured correctly, I want
yeah,
to say, I mean, if you're configured correctly, then you have the layers of defense to be able to this not be a nightmare scenario for you, just like every cybersecurity profile for an organization. But you got to put the time and the effort in to do that, 100%, because it's
yeah.
going to be over with before you figure out what's going on if you're not careful.
Yeah. And on the other side, right? So technology companies, it's funny because the app providers on one side, they could create more risk in making you more efficient. But on the other side, like the security companies are using, or going just as fast to use AI to try
Right.
to, it's really just speed and the ability to look through all
That's
of
right.
these new things. And you said the
That's right.
reaction time has to be that much faster.
Yeah, and we're going to have to rely on automation, to be
Yep.
able to keep track with it. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right. 100%.
All right, Andrew, I'm going to throw it over to you.
All right. Hey, Bob. So, getting away from the buzzwords a little bit, and we look at, KPIs. Can MSPs use, or what are some simple, KPIs MSPs can use to monitor, safe and compliant usage of AI in their stack? Is it even possible?
Yeah, I mean there are, and again, there are people who know a lot more about it than me, but at least the work that I've done and the understanding that I've gained is by looking at there's a thing called an AI inference refusal rate, believe it or not, and that's when you ask an AI to do something and it refuses based on its definition of what is a good prompt and what is a bad prompt. That's a thing. So you can
Mhm.
actually monitor those refusal rates because to Gary's point, some of this is going to be trial and error by bad guys, right? And so they're going to be firing a lot of stuff at it that gets a big no from the agent, and then they're going to keep working until they get a big yes, right? So the referral that those the refusal rate is actually a pretty cool KPI to be able to kind of track and say, okay, well, suddenly I had a spike of 500%, in the refusal rate on this. Unless you've got an internal employee doing something magical, then this is worth knowing about, right? Then the frequency of the API calls, another great metric to be paying attention to. Obviously, something that you're gonna want to keep your track on, because that gives you a good indication if you see spikes outside of behavioral norms, and you can do something about that. The number of AI generated workflows, because here's the thing, AI can be used to generate AI workflows. You know what I mean? So now you got to be careful about in the world of virtual machines, if you see 500 new virtual machines crank up and they're all doing a Bitcoin mining, then that tells you something. Well, it's the same sort of possibility inside of the scope of the AI sphere, where you have the AI generating a lot of AI generated workflows. Well, you can kind of watch about how many workflows that you have in operation and the volume of them. Again, at least it's something, right? I mean, I admit a lot of this is like looking through the window into the house where things are going on, but it's better than not being in the same neighborhood at all, right? I mean, so and then you can do some alerts on activity, that behaviorally, right? Baselines are outside the scope of what you normally see. You can detect anomalies. AI drift is another thing, believe it or not, about how the AI behaves. Because by the way, I mean, we could talk another episode about the types of ways that you can manipulate AI engines to get different results if you're trying to do that, which is a whole nother thing, right?
Yeah.
We're just talking
I
about
feel
dealing
like,
with the
in
production.
Europe, I know they're further ahead.
Yes.
Like they already have a panel and they're already putting things around the
Right.
fact that you need to, in certain industries, you need to be able to document your drift.
Yeah, 100%. And you need to store baselines, and you need to actually have your models in a repository. You know what I mean? Snapshots of it, so that because unfortunately, that's going to be the only way. It's like backups. We're back to the backup world. Back up your engine, you know what I mean, and have it at a snapshot in time and
Yeah.
an immutable backup that nobody can monkey with. Because if something bad happens or somebody poisons your model, you got to have the ability to go back to a
Yeah,
point where it
because
wasn't
it's going to
poisoned.
be like, you think about it, like in healthcare, in
100%.
defense,
Yeah.
in utilities. It's there already in all those things, like critical infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Hmm.
Bob, that's some of the metrics you just threw out. Man, you'd be cool if you built a little white paper on that. I think the MSPs would find that really fascinating.
Yeah.
And if I'm saying, hey, I'm a company that's going to do Copilot only, and then I am one of those people that's going to get around it. Are you saying like, hey, your traffic flow, you're monitoring traffic on the network, you can pick that stuff up if you do have the correct telemetry in place to follow it?
Well, let's talk about it in the two possibilities. It's somebody using a third-party engine on net, right, inside of your network, and then somebody using a third-party engine off net, right?
Right.
On net, you have the ability to control that. You could easily control the existence of independent models on net. So that part you can handle. It's when they're off net that gets to be the tricky part, right? And when they're off net, all you can rely on, the only thing you rely on is data governance policies about what can be taken off net to be viewed or what connections are allowed to be had from off net. We're going to be stuck back at that, what we would probably call the Stone Age of, okay, we're not going to allow these sets of data to be accessed by somebody on a VPN or whatever, but because it could be misused and put through an engine. You're going to have to consider it at that level, right?
This gets into, we were doing control. I think it's control 6 of CIS just a week
Yep.
ago. But this is where so much of access controls comes in. Like just you talk about layers, Bob. Isn't this one of the most foundational things of who has access, right?
Yeah.
To what things, and from an account perspective, are we commissioning and decommissioning accounts based on roles and things of that nature?
Man, the level of you getting your ass kicked has just gone up exponentially as these things get adopted, right? Because if you got a rogue account and someone gets those credentials and they happen to have access, the fallout can be orders of magnitude worse. I mean, it can, right? I mean, because they just having, with all of these modular MCPs, right, being built into the Microsoft ecosystem where everything's got an MCP module, which you could just think of it in terms of a pissed off API connection, right? It's an API connection with a little AI attached to it. And if that doesn't scare the snot out of you, it should, right? So you don't even have to really know how to talk to the damn thing. It'll figure out how to talk to it, and it'll figure out how to hand you stuff. That opens up those labeling policies and access policies are going to be so critical. And to your point, maintaining and controlling your access control lists and the people who are in it I don't know how to explain it anymore to people. This is hypercritical and you're going to have to pay attention. So, and
Yeah.
you can, those label policies, and Derek's talking about it. I can see him running in the chat. You have to, they will work. You just have to put them in place and understand how they are. And they're non-trivial. You have to, I remember when we first had routers that we could put, policies on. It took a little while to figure out how to do it correctly. It will do the same thing at a data level, data layer problem or data labeling level, but you're going to have to get good at it. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to get good at it.
Yeah. I mean, Gary, in some respects, do you see this from a maturity level for MSPs that there will be ones that really take advantage of this and separate the way they have with security and automation?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, let's lump AI and automation together for our conversation. Yeah. So we're already seeing it, Andrew, the beginning of it.
Yeah.
I agree.
I was having dinner with Joy Balan last night, and the types of projects that Summit set, like as an example, Summit 7, which is at the throat of CMMC, right? From the biggest of big. It's really interesting what the ones that have the right maturity and level. So, not to suggest that no one else can do it, but it's the opportunity is what I'm saying is tremendous.
Yeah. And the opportunity is tremendous, but I think it's going to, at least initially, it's going to be taken advantage of by, pretty small percentage of providers based on history, just where they are today and their even ability to get there.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a big, investment. Like, I feel like most of the platform companies that are out there are understanding it, recognize it, and starting to, they can afford, right, to make those investments. They can amortize it over, more customers and seats.
Yeah. Yeah. And what Derek's saying, by the way, I remember we did our data flow with Brian, Brian Weeks, Brian Blakely. Data flow is 100%, I think, where you start. We had those conversations, and something maybe we should bring back, Gary, because those were great sessions.
Yeah.
So Bob, what about, the most common blind spots you're seeing and how, small businesses are deploying or embedding AI, especially ones MSPs might be able to, help fix?
I mean, you're going to go. The easy ones are going to be just what we've been spending a lot of time talking about: lack of logging, right? AI specific logging. That's something that MSPs, once they understand what needs to be logged, that's pretty straightforward to help people get that done. Also understanding, unreviewed or persistent AI workflows. Okay, who put those workflows in play? Was it a human that put that workflow in play, or did the AI assistants put those workflows in play? And how did that happen? And what's the inventory of them? If you do not pay attention to that, then that is a very easy way for someone to take advantage. It's a great attack vector, really. Granting excess or tenant-wide permissions, you got to look. It's a permission thing, going after making sure the AI assistant does it. All of those services that are a part of the AI assistant, you need to make sure that you don't grant them just excessive ability to get all over your network or tenant-wide access, right? That's a place that you can kind of spend some time. And then obviously the absence of, control access for certain types of AI actions, right? You can do a few policies that minimize how bad it can be if you just understand that policy layer and how it interacts with the AI assistants. Those are things that are easily things that I think an MSP could get their mind around and actually start tomorrow introducing into organizations that are using AI and just going at it full tilt. At least that gives some. And by the way, we talked about this. If you're an MSP and you do not see this as an evolutionary step that is about to occur in our reality from a provider standpoint, then you're already in danger of you're dodo bird in it to some extent already if you do not realize what is happening right in front of you, because the pace of change on this is going to be going so fast. It's going to be very hard to catch the bus once it's left the station. So,
Andrew, Bob, I remember, we had built my IT process for standards and alignment, prior to CIS and standards that are out there. And I remember in the beginning, how hard it was to, like, we're putting standards together by, looking different places and then things would happen and we would change the standards, and then later it's like, okay, here's an industry standard. Somebody else like cumulatively did a bunch of work, but we're at that beginning stage now, like where we were before there was standards.
Yeah.
And so that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I did a little webinar with 50 C-level people about AI security, and when I was explaining to them things like, well, you need to have an AI security assessment, which I threw that term out there, but I knew it was a combination of data policy and privacy and cybersecurity combined, right? Is sort of what would make up a rational assessment. And when it was over, I got called by half a dozen of them saying, "Hey, I want to get that AI security assessment." I said, "Well, wait a minute,
It doesn't
wait a minute."
exist.
Yeah. So what I did,
first.
yeah. But to your point, so what I did is I called Tim Golden and the crew over and Brian Blakely over at Compliance Scorecard. And I says, "Hey, look, this was about 8 weeks ago." I says, "We need to build an AI security assessment, that comes after like a co-pilot assessment or a readiness assessment. We need an AI security assessment. So this is the next thing, and an MSP can get involved in evaluating the security levels, for an organization." So we actually started that, and we're waiting to get back together to get it, but we got our first cut of it. But to your point, Gary, is that yes, we have to all depend on each other to figure out how to get into this game in a constructive way. And the only way we're going to do that is working with each other, because it's too big a problem for any one or two people to try and go tackle.
But the standard, the assessment won't be good until you use it, and then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's the only way it's going to be good. It has to shit the bed.
Well, yeah, you got to break a lot of eggs to make an omelet. Yes, 100%.
Do you, Gary, just out of curiosity, do you feel insurers might use this as a means to get around potentially payouts? Like, for example, hey, you didn't put in good access control here, hence why, this occurred.
I mean, I feel like they're always trying not to pay, but I think with this, I look at it more like they're going to need to adapt their requirements. Like they have to say, like, they didn't ask you a question about it, right? Like now they really go after things that you said that you had XYZ in place. And it turns out that you didn't. And that's why you got breached. So I think they're probably working really hard right now to evolve their requirements to cover this. And that's a tough thing for them. Like they
Yeah, they
have
don't
more
even.
risk than they did 3 months ago, Bob.
Yeah, 100%. And the interest, they don't even know the right questions to ask at the cybersecurity level, much less
Right.
the AI level, right? I mean, they don't have like, hey, you need to meet these requirements and prove that you went and did this, or we won't cover you anymore. They just say, hey, check the boxes on the stuff that that you're doing so that we know you're okay. So all of that is evolving at light speed. Gary's right. I would they use it as an excuse? Well, is it a day with a Y in it? Of course, somebody's going to use it as an excuse, right? But the bottom line is that this again, it's just the way the universe is going. So they're gonna have to suck it up and figure out how to ride the bus. Be better if they started interacting a little more with us as service providers, so they understood the problem scale better. That would be a change. How about talk to the people who are getting their face smashed in all the time about what's the right thing to do? That
Yeah,
would be good.
Yeah.
interesting. So Bob, what about, how MSPs might want to explain AI misuse,
Right.
like LLMs leaking sensitive data, that a business owner, right, or a board could understand,
Yeah.
because a lot of what we're talking about today, everybody on this call, our audience understands, things like data labeling, access control. Like, how do you bring it down to their level?
Well, yeah, and this is, again, hopefully you're fortunate enough to be one of the MSPs that can have strategic conversations, with your enterprises. And if you can, then it is going to be a chore for you to explain that AI in and of itself represents a completely different animal from a cultural and intellectual standpoint. You got to understand that these are engines that can do a lot of work based on the instructions they're given, right? And you have to kind of keep it at just about that simple level and then explain what I mean by that is that you can do things like prompt injection. What's that? Well, you ask it to do something, but somebody else sneaks something in front or behind you to alter what's going to happen, in the end, what's really going to happen, right? So you just have to know that. You're going to ask it a straightforward question. Well, somebody's going to put a not straightforward question to get something out that they want in front or behind it. That's basically prompt injection, right? And then you're going to have to use a lot of pictures. Right? This is going to be one of those times when you're going to want to break out some pictures and say, look, here's where this sits in our ecosystem at a business level, not a network diagram or a technology diagram, but just a business level. This is where this sits in the universe for you. These are the kinds of things that can be done with it, like misusing it is pretty straightforward if you don't have the permissions or automation is misused. Again, if you don't, you have to explain it in terms of this device has the ability to do a lot of work in a very short period of time and do it pretty well, but that means it could do it for the wrong reasons or the right reasons just that fast. So when it's used for the wrong reasons, these are the ramifications of something like that occurring, right? And
Yeah.
so you just got to be very clear and use very simple analogies about, hey, this where it sits in. I would not make I would try to have one basic diagram. I wouldn't try to do a whole lot more than that because it's going to blow their minds to begin with.
Yeah. Let your how you just this would be a good clip, Andrew, to put out, right? Because what Bob kind of the talk track he just described, which is, kind of showing something simple, use an example that they can understand in a non-technical way that makes sense to them so that they can understand this risk and that they're currently living with it, right?
Mhm. Well, almost the guardrail analogy, right, Gary? What do you want
There
to
it
allow
is.
in and out of your business? And do you care what goes in and out, right, Gary?
Yeah.
Or are you going to put some guardrails around that. So, well, good. Hey, Bob, I'm going to let me just see. I think I had one more, but I want to make
Yeah,
sure you have time to ask Bob, Gary some business questions. I think it's really
yeah,
important, but I guess, maybe, policy, any
yeah.
top things that you would kind of outline if you were talking policy.
Yeah, real
What
quick. Yeah, I
thing?
can do something real quick. So if you're an MSP, you need to have an AI usage policy. You need to write it. You need to understand why first, understand why you need it, but then write it. Acceptable use, approved tools, prohibited behaviors. You need to define those things. That you could just think about it in terms of a usage, just like we have an IT usage policy, you need to have an AI usage policy. And you need to draw those rails for your organization sooner than later, right? And then AI access control and role policies that needs to be well defined inside of your organization so that you know that you limit the scope of what AI assistants can do inside of your provider network for obvious reasons. And you're going to want to err since when Microsoft enables stuff, it's all promiscuous until you go back and tighten it up. One little gift from me to Microsoft. How about just having it tightened up to begin with, and then we have to go take the reins off a little at a time instead of leaving it wide ass open. But I understand why they're doing it. But as a provider, you don't have that choice. You need to make sure that your access control and your role policies are well defined, and then the monitoring. It's that logging, making sure you got Azure logging, Graph logging, Purview logging. That's all important. Those
But
you get those procedures in place.
we're talking about the basics, but every single software company on the planet is working on agentic IT. So what about when everyone starts to get there and you start to have all these different agents? You know what I
We could
mean?
talk another hour about that, but you are
Yeah.
hitting on a nerve because these are we talk about third party compromises all the time, don't we? I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about that. Well, think about it in terms of third party agentic AIs, where you're gathering up agents who people specialize in, because the idea for an agent is it does something very straightforward and simple in limited scope, but does it extremely well, which means people are going to start marshaling these agents right into a bigger system of agents to get a job done that they're trying to get done. Well, what does that do? That starts incorporating the risk of third party compromises on agents, right? And their behavior and affecting their inference. Think I'll give you a quick example. If you build a company whose product is you notify people about what dosages of medicine to give people based on the telemetry that you receive from the health organization, you define dosages and everything else. I mean, real time, right? Well, think about that. If you use any agent down in there that winds up being compromised, that it's been changed to infer that, hey, when you ask for A, I really want B. You know what I mean? Anything like that, right? Just imagine what that could look like, from a ramification standpoint.
I was Bob. I'm hoping we can get Ivan Fernandez on here if he's listening. Chime in. He's awesome. He was talking to me about how he used agentic AI. He's fascinated by it and
Yeah.
how good and bad it can be. And
Yeah.
I'm going to very high paraphrase what he did, but he said, search LinkedIn for 20 CEOs that just started their position in like the last, I don't know, it was like the last month. And then go look for their public email addresses. Don't give me anything like Gmails or anything like that. And then find out if DKIM is enabled or not. So, and it literally, it says, is this for nefarious reasons? No, he's like, no, this is for research. And it literally built a script for him on
Yeah.
all different, I mean, so it's really fascinating in a good and a bad way about what these systems can do. So,
Yeah.
Gary, let me give some time to you, Bob, so he
Yeah.
can
I got him.
answer this question. So,
Yeah. So Gary, you're always talking about like roles and process first, right? I mean, that is something that you speak all the time. Can you give us like your business logic on how these MSPs need to be thinking about their business from an operational perspective in terms of go to market as it relates to all of this?
Yeah. So let me like zoom out a little bit and tell you how I kind of look at it as I think about working with MSPs, with AI automation. One, they got to think about they do got to think about their own business, not just being more efficient in support first. You got to get there before other people get there, but in your business operation. So those two things is what I'm encouraging everyone to do because Bob, you mentioned it. A lot of what we do today, like all the changes that have happened in our industry, have built on top of the same car frame, which is projects, tickets, alerts, user support. Like that's what we've done since when I got into this business in 1996. Everything else kind of been dumped on top. Well, that car frame is not going to be there in probably 3 years, is my guess. And I always say you got to change the car while the car is rolling down the highway. That's when
That's right.
we had a car frame, right? Well, without a car frame, I don't know. We might need to be building a new car in the garage and do a pit stop to take the new car out. And so I think, working on that. So that's how I think MSP business is going to change. And every other time, because we had that frame, that foundation, when people say, oh, the cloud's going to wipe out MSPs, the security is going to wipe out a lot of MSPs. I never thought that it would because we had that foundation. It just left some behind in terms of growth and profitability. This time, I think there could be a reshuffling of the deck for the first time because nothing's ever gone to the very heart and core of our value and our relationship and how we market and how we deal with customers.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's the first dramatic why this is going to be dramatically different in the next 3 to 4 years than all the changes in the past 15 years that we've experienced. I don't know that MSPs are thinking in that way.
Well, they better start.
Gary, can you just define, like, I think I understand what you mean by reshuffling the deck. Do you mean like, hey, if I don't understand the impact of automation, what it can do to my internal roles and what companies can do without me?
Yeah, I don't think companies are going to be buying us for the same reason. I don't think Andrew, I'll give you a little sneak peek. I'm going to do a keynote on this a couple of weeks at Flow, the Roost event. But we've seen it with other industries where I think we get confused over what business we're in. It's easy to think that we're in the, security business right now. And that was, support and security is never the business we've been in. It's been the things we've had to do to provide what customers really want. They want to know, they want to run their business and they want to run it better. What they need from us in a few years is going to be much different. And what we provide today is not going to be as necessary. When both those things are happening, it means the business is changing very fast. And this is led by customers, not by us. In the past, we've led most of the technology changes. We brought it. And the reason SMBs go slower is because MSPs are slow to change. But when it's driven by the customer, we don't have a choice, Andrew.
So it's almost like these are maybe bad analogies, but to sum it up real quick, Gary, it's how like something like an Uber, something like an Expedia and those industries just
disruptive.
Yeah, like
disruptive. Yeah, exactly. We don't want to be taxis. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And
it happens. And when it starts to happen, it's going to happen over a few years. It's not going to take a decade. Right. Like I think we'll be in another place, 4 or 5 years from now. I think we're going to be a much different business. So one, how do we stay on top of it? Usually the people that are advancing first win, because as you start to make those advancements, you need to find ways of replacing that value first. Right. And that comes to the second piece is understanding right now about AI and automation, where SMBs, where our customers are. Because we can get them there. Like we have the basic tenets or can adopt them to get them there. But if not, somebody else will. And it'll probably be somebody that is not dealing with them today who specializes in this. That's what happened in the enterprise. The big consulting companies, they just couldn't afford to come down to the SMBs, but someone will figure it out. And they'll have a big disadvantage because we already have the cost of sales. We own the customer, right? So we have a big advantage with it. So those two things. And then the third one is what we're talking about today. As we do this and have to do it quickly, we got to make sure we're understanding the changing security parameters around this. And just like in the beginning, when we had to go from an MSP to either an MSSP or a security first MSP, whatever we want to call it, remember when we had Tyler Sanders on, Andrew.
Yeah.
And one thing he said was, what changed for them is they put somebody in charge, right?
Mhm.
They had someone who, both in communicating with the customers and developing their policies, was responsible. Like they had their first, VCISO, and and then their culture chart to change so that in their current delivery roles, security was baked in. I think the same thing's going to have to happen here. We're not going to train our whole team to be experts on AI any more than we were on security. Like it takes time, but we're going to need to get a resource at some point that can both communicate with the customer and be able to build the culture and work closely like with the security team in order to do that. I don't know, Bob, does that make sense?
No, 100%. No, I mean, it's exactly how we're going to do it. I mean, you have to, you're not going to, like you said, there, by the way, even if you went out today, try to find a bunch of AI experts, there's not a bunch of AI experts. So it's going to take some time, right, for us to build that talent set. This falls right into what I had as the next question anyway, is like, Gary, how can we make, I mean, we want to make a case for MSPs, right, that AI security is kind of a differentiator or opportunity for them, not only to be able to go talk about it, but also include things like AI governance questions and stuff like that in their quarterly reports, right? Their QBRs. What's the best way we can make a case for an MSP to start that process like now?
You mentioned an audit. I look at it a little differently because I look at ongoing alignment, and I would say start building these kind of questions right into, if you're first off, if you're not doing any type of technical alignment today, I mean, you got to be in security alignment. You got to be thinking about that. Now you got to start to add right these type of reviews regularly, Bob, because
Yeah,
what customers understand is, hey, here's the box for security. Here's the box for AI that we have. Here's where you are. Let me talk in the places where you're out of alignment, what your risks are based on what I know about your business and the things we have to do to get you into alignment. That might be a different service. It might be a different product. It might be a change that they don't like in the way they have to do business with
yeah,
their end users, whatever it is. But I think we have to use the same process we use with security, which is we have some standards. We align our customers. We see where they're out of alignment. We have a business conversation with them.
yeah. Makes perfect sense. One other angle I think, and I'm interested to get your opinion on this, right? Is there's also this opportunity for people, MSPs to go in and document these approved versus shadow AI approaches to doing business, right? Just like you need a device inventory, there's an opportunity for them to go in and find out if they do have people using independent AI agents versus the ones that are corporate. So, how does that help when you get, I can tell you, what do you think that does if you have that inventory? What do you think that does as far as helping in an audit or a breach?
Oh my God. Well, I think, well, immediately with customers, like that's impactful. When you give them that kind of information, it's kind of like I remember when we first started tracking where people were going on the internet in the beginning. And we
Right.
we showed them one report and shut our mouth. You know what I mean? And they're like,
Yes.
oh my God, like the leading website was like WWF. eBay was number two. And then all their line of business apps were below it. So I think the
Yeah.
same type of thing is that when we start to show them, some of what's really happening that they don't know about, I
Yeah.
think it's impactful. And I'm hoping that's something we do, Bob, before a breach and
Yes.
before we
Yes.
get to that point. But one of the big things is, look, I still see people asking me questions and using terms like account managers versus VCIO, or they're VCIOs. But when I'm asking them questions about what they know about their customers and their apps or who they deal with, whether it's a decision maker, they're not there, Bob. And like it was hard with security. Like you still have a lot of people who are saying my customers don't want to invest for that reason. They haven't got to the right person and had the right business conversation. With this, you can't get anywhere.
Yeah.
Like if you're not evolving to that relationship with every one of your customers, nothing we've said today is going to matter. You're
That's
just
right.
going to be dealing at a very low level, implementing the security things as a vendor hands them to you that you're going to resell. Like that's where you're going to be left. And
Yep.
that's the other thing, Andrew, that's different with this. This is a business. This is pure business. Security was like technology in business, but this is more on the business side.
It is.
And too many MSPs, Bob, they're not there with their customers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
That's really
agree.
good point, Gary. This is this is, like you said, this is about productivity. This is about, competitive advantage, right? So,
Money. It's about money. Let's just be straight. That's what it's about.
well, and yeah, and money,
And
but
because of the result, yeah, is money. Yeah.
right. So anyway,
And
awesome.
survival of businesses.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not just the MSP business that's going to get reshuffled. It's a lot of businesses that are going to get
Yeah.
reshuffled definitely in the next 5 to 7 years. Like, our economy is going to look much different. And so it affects us and it affects all of our customers. We need to be the right questions. We want to win on the transition, and we want to show our customers how to win on that transition.
Yeah, I got one last thing, and I'll say I just want to say this one last thing. Just imagine for a minute if electricity was free. What would that do? This is going
Yeah.
to have the same impact. This is going to
Yeah.
wind up having a similar impact.
Yeah, think about that. That's a good analogy. What if electricity is look, this is probably one of the biggest things right since electricity, but electricity needed infrastructure and it had a cost, so it took a long time. It happened over time. This
Mhm.
one, in probably 3 years, cumulative of the smartest people in the whole earth are going to be in everyone's pocket for free.
Yep.
Sure.
That's the prediction. Like 3 or 4 years, it'll get to that point.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, fantastic. Bob, thanks for coming on. This was really good. Gareth, thanks for sharing your business perspectives always. And everybody, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, we like to give answers usually, but today we gave more questions.
It was a good one, though. It was excellent. So until then, we'll see you next week. Make it a great week. Be safe. Take care.